let's crack on with this session. Today's session is focused on exploring how the centrality of protection is playing out in practice, with a particular focus on embedding protection in food security responses at organisational and intercluster levels. So we have a panel of expert speakers with us today. We're really honoured to have them with us. Each has a lot of learning to share about how the centrality of protection is working at that very operational level, why it's important, what the challenges are, and how we can work together across these two key sectors of protection and food security to ensure that we are placing the protection of people's basic rights at the heart of our humanitarian responses. Maybe just a quick word on why are we talking about this now? So as we've heard throughout the week in the Protection Forum, in Gaza, in Sudan, in Myanmar, DRC and elsewhere, violations of people's basic rights continue unabated. The resulting humanitarian needs are reaching unprecedented levels. And all of this is coinciding with those sharp reductions in funding across the humanitarian system. In this particular environment, we really need to step up our implementation of the centrality of protection approach. Because when we embed protection at the heart of our sectoral and multi-sectoral responses, it means that we can identify and try to mitigate those protection risks, i.e. the violations of international humanitarian, human rights and refugee law that are driving humanitarian needs, while addressing those needs at the same time. This approach means that we can have greater and more sustainable impact with the more limited resources that we have access to. To quote a colleague from the food security cluster that I listened to this morning, we need to do better with less. And the centrality of protection, I think, really helps us do that. So onto our esteemed panel. First, we're delighted to be able to hear from Edward O'Dwyer, who is UNHCR's representative in the Central African Republic. Edward is going to set the scene a little bit for us. And we'll take a couple of questions straight away because unfortunately Edward is very busy, as all of our field colleagues are right now, so he'll have to leave us just after his intervention. Once we've heard from Edward, then we're going to go to Maxwell Sebensaner, who is the Deputy Director of FAO's Office of Emergencies and Resilience. And Maxwell is kindly going to offer some reflections as co-lead of the food security cluster, and in particular, some insights from the livelihoods and agricultural side of food security interventions. Then we're going to be hopefully hearing from Medoune Batili, who is the project manager at Action Mopti in Mali. And we're going to be pausing for some further questions and reflections on both of their presentations before we go on to a next set of speakers. So, Edward, thanks so much for joining us from Bangui. We're delighted to have you. Maybe just to say, representing UNHCR, which of course is one of the three co-champions of centrality of protection in the Interagency Standing Committee, and of course is our lead agency for the protection cluster. I wondered if you could first share some headline thoughts on the centrality of protection with us. Why is it so important now, and why are food security actors so important in terms of reducing protection risks?
Thanks very much, Vicky, and good morning to colleagues everywhere. Very pleased to be here, honoured to be here in this very, very important discussion. And just as at the outset, I couldn't agree more with your analysis there, Vicky, on how you're after situating the problem. As we approach this humanitarian reset and very uncertain times, I mean, first of all, what comes out is we need to know what's going on around us. We need protection knowledge. We need protection and analysis, and we need that analysis and knowledge to drive our programs so as that we do our very best to put the human rights of all of the people we serve at the center of what we're doing, and that includes with the local communities. So that, to state the obvious, and it is an obvious thing, but as we proceed with less funds, the analysis that we generate, the common understanding that we generate, UNHCR and the whole HCTs, that is crucial, because if it's not properly informed, then you won't have the right reaction, or you won't have the right responses. Humanitarian and development responses. The second point is this eternal correlation between humanitarian shocks, food insecurity, and protection. So on the one hand, and I'm just reading a quote here, protection risks lead to food insecurity. And then on the other hand, food insecurity leads to protection risks. So here you have this interplay between the two between the two phenomena. The displacement, obviously driven by conflict and disaster. And when that happens, people lose their jobs, their livelihoods, they lose their families, they lose their roots with where they are. And of course, they can't produce food, they can't provide for their families, and that leads to multiple protection problems, whether on the socio-economic rights, whether on the political and civil rights. All of those rights are impacted, even though we're talking about food, which is access to food is socio-economic right, huge impact across the full spectrum of human rights. So what we're talking about then is that operationalizing the centrality of protection is now, in this context, more important than ever. And I mean, first thing that comes to mind is Sudan. I mean, we're very close to Sudan here, and we were involved in that situation last week. I mean, absolutely crucial, and some of the horrific stuff that's going on there, among the other places you mentioned. Now, that the only way to get human rights back on the table in such context is for us to put that centrality of protection in the middle of what we're doing, and try to advocate and mobilize funds around that. It has to be efficient, it has to be informed, and it has to be overall well implemented. So it's not abstract. We know that this centrality of protection is not abstract. It's about everything that we're doing in food distribution, for livelihoods, shelter, and social services, and how our actions and what we do in all of those sectors contribute or add to the risks. So we do a good job, we can reduce risks. We do a job that's maybe rushed or informed or not informed, and you can see very quickly, very, very, very quickly how this can degenerate in the field when, you know, in front of a food distribution, for instance, that's not well calculated in advance with proper distribution lists, and there are many examples. But the idea there is that it's the responsibility of all protection actors. UNHCR of Protection Agency, the centrality of protection goes to WFP, goes to FAO, and key is to keep these protection principles and basic priorities in the forefront of our minds when we're designing and implementing programs. Better quality funding, greater political support, and tougher accountability are required from HCTs, from donors, to both incentivize and support this approach. I'm talking here about conditionality in one way. Conditionality on funding should be demanded by HCTs, that if these protection safeguards are not being implemented, that should impact your ability to raise funds. We need to show the HCTs, and we need to show donors that we're actually doing this in order to qualify for certain funding. So there should be accountability, and there should be oversight from donors and HCTs, more oversight to ensure that we collectively put the protection at the center of what we're doing. Now, the thing about food security, I mean, this sector is the biggest, most resourced, biggest footprint. I mean, it has the potential to save more lives than probably any other sector. So that's one thing that we need. It needs to be emphasized. So the actions of WFP and FAO on the field, and FAO, I know, and those two agencies are really well advanced. I mean, I'm not teaching anybody anything here today, but it's just to emphasize the importance of what those agencies do in collaboration with the HCTs, and that strategy putting protection in the center. But it requires that collaboration between the protection sector and those agencies. That needs to be a dialogue. There needs to be a continuous dialogue in order to exchange good practices and make sure that when risks are analyzed, every context has its own risks. We know that. The risks in this area, even one part of the country, are not the same in another part of the country. So before you go out in your white car, you know, on a Tuesday morning or something to do X, Y, and Z, the risk and going there might be different risk than going somewhere else. So it's very contextual, and the preparation in doing that needs not to be underestimated. I'm finishing now. I'm going to conclude. So the conclusion is that this relationship between insecurity, protection, and conflict, in food insecurity, protection, and conflict is not new. In fact, we all know how old it is. We go back to Darfur many years ago. We go back to Darfur last week. It's the same relationship that's there. But today, protection risks are driving food insecurity, and food insecurity are driving protection risks. So that's the point we were made already. Families are forced to flee violence and abandon their livelihoods and face attacks on their dignity. It's a vicious cycle that our efforts need to try and break. And it's for this reason that centrality of protection in our common action is so important. It's not abstract. Again, we insist, it's not abstract. It's about doing things together in an informed manner. And it is not the task of one agency or one cluster. It is the task of everybody. It needs to be reported upon. It needs to be analyzed, monitored, evaluated constantly to make sure that the humanitarian coordinator in a particular operation has eyes on what's going on a regular basis. It needs to be discussed on the agenda at the HCT meetings at least once a month. At least once a month. It needs to be an agenda. What have you done on the centrality of protection in your operations? And you can choose one out of, if you have 4 risks in the country, choose one per month. Do something practical, but do M&E on this, and have some conditionality in the approach. I hope that's of some help.
Thanks so much, Edward. That's a really impassioned plea there for all of us to take or adopt this approach and put it into practice. So thanks so much. Just quick, because I know you have to go. Are there any immediate questions from our audience for Edward before he has to depart? No, I don't see any so far. So thanks again, Edward. Really appreciate you taking the time out from your super busy schedule in Central African Republic to join us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and it was great to be here. Have a very positive and fruitful session. Thank you.
Thanks, Edward. Okay, so let's move on to our next speaker, which is, as I mentioned, Maxwell Sibinsana, the Deputy Director of Emergencies and Resilience at FAO. So welcome, Maxwell. Lovely to have you with us also. I wondered if you could offer firstly a few thoughts as the co-lead agency for food security in our system, and then explain maybe or give us some insights into how different types of food security interventions can help reduce protection risks that we've already been talking about. Thanks, Maxwell.
Thank you so much, Victoria, and greetings, colleagues. It is a point that Edward has just highlighted, that food insecurity and protection risks are inseparable. Violations of people's rights in conflict and other crises drive food insecurity from entrenched discrimination, damage to agricultural land and infrastructure, to deliberate denial of access to food assistance. And when people cannot meet their basic food needs, they are exposed to other violations of their basic rights, including sexual exploitation and abuse and other forms of gender-based violence, forced displacement, forced conscription, and discrimination. And when we look at the context in which we are responding, we realize that there's also a convergence with climate-related shocks and economic or pandemics or epidemics that compound the impact of violence and abuse. The Global Network Against Food Crisis just released a hotspot report, and of the 16 countries or territories that will have a worsening food security situation from November to May 2026. 14 as a result of conflict. And conflict is a driver of the food insecurity that we see, and the associated violations that Edward, and I've just alluded to, become day-to-day issues that we have to deal with. This reality requires us as food security actors to better understand the protection risks that drive and result from food insecurity, and then adapt our responses to mitigate them, as well as addressing food security needs. I think Ed highlighted how food insecurity can result in protection risk, but also how protection risks can result in food insecurity, particularly where humanitarian access is constrained by conflict. This is what the centrality of protection policy means in practice. And speaking on behalf of the World Food Programme, as well as FAO, as the two core leads of the food security cluster, I take this opportunity to reiterate our commitment to fulfilling our responsibilities under that policy. We know we have a critical role to play as probably the largest cluster with a broad range of activities and significant outreach to communities. We need to exploit these advantages to ensure we are doing our part to reduce the grave protection risks that communities are facing. I just want to highlight a few specific points that the food security cluster is currently doing. We have a wide range of expertise and capacities which can and often are used to help reduce protection risks. I will outline some of the ways in which agricultural livelihood programs can reduce these risks, and I'm hoping that Ross will be able to join from WFP and will give us more insights that may be specific to food assistance and cash transfers. I'll refer to FAO's work as just an illustration, also acknowledging that both with the World Food Programme and FAO deliver programs through a myriad of NGO as well as government agencies. FAO has a clear and long-standing responsibility to respect, promote, and uphold people's basic rights. That is a fundamental responsibility that we see at the core of what we are supposed to do. And this is within the Constitution, which charges us with supporting states to secure freedom from hunger. The minimum expression of the right to food, which itself is intrinsically linked with other basic rights, it is reinforced by our obligations under the UN Charter to respect, protect, and promote human rights, and of course, by the Interagency Standing Committee Centrality of Protection Policy and the UN Agenda for Protection. Like many agriculture or livelihoods actors, FAO makes a unique contribution to mitigating the protection risks that drive and result from food insecurity. This contribution is not new. We and many of our partners have been working in this way for decades, but it is more critical than ever because of the scale of food insecurity driven by violations of the international humanitarian, human rights, as well as refugee law in a crisis around the world. And because we all need to ensure that we are using the dwindling resources to efficiently and effectively deliver programs, we have to make choices that are critical and evidence of where the need is, as well as the evidence of the solutions that are most impactful and cost efficient becomes critical input into the work that we do. Embedding protection at the core of our organizational and collective responses allows us to achieve that. As outlined under the ISC policy, as food security organizations, our protection responsibilities require us to do, say, 4 things that I will outline here. First is to understand the risks that drive or may be impacted by food insecurity. And second is to mainstream protection in every intervention that we undertake. Third is proactively use our interventions to address identified protection risks. And fourth, to engage in advocacy with the duty bearers, as they have the primary duty to protect their populations. In 2024, FAO undertook an internal review to understand how we are doing in these key areas. The review found a range of positive examples illustrating our unique contribution and also highlighting how we could further fulfill our potential to support collective efforts to reduce the protection risks driving humanitarian needs. And over the decades, and working with our food security and protection partners, we have achieved quite a few things. I'll highlight some illustrative things in the interest of time, just to give a sense of how we contribute to this agenda. We have provided the evidence base for advocacy with duty bearers on the right to food, including conflict-induced hunger. The work that FAO led using UNOCET analysis provided a stark illustration of how agricultural land and infrastructure, as well as other critical assets, were damaged in Gaza. And while the damage was done over a couple of months, the recovery to this will take many years. And during that period, there's a risk of prolonged periods under which protection risks affect the affected people, particularly those that have been displaced, and many that may have moved out of the areas where they could draw a decent livelihood. And our collective UN and NGO reporting to the UN Security Council on the resolution 2417 helps inform states' positioning on this theme and specific crises. We've also helped to prevent forced displacement and supported rights-based durable solutions for those who are displaced through supporting more sustainable livelihoods. We have learned that like you and me, once we have been affected by any shock, the first thing that we would want to experience is the certainty of how we can provide for our families. And the people affected by disasters in West Bank have the same aspirations as you and me. And through the provision of materials as well as other resources to build the livestock shelters and also the provision of alternative energy sources, we have contributed to the reduction in the displacement of herders as well as their livestock. In Turkey, we provided vocational training and facilitated employment opportunities for refugees and host communities to support local integration. As you may be aware, it is easy to be hospitable to people that might come into your household, into your community for a couple of days. But when people continue to be displaced and remain in a particular host community for prolonged periods, then the hospitality might be less. And the work of ensuring that the support is both for the displaced as well as those that hosting the displaced enhances cohesion and reduces the risk of local conflict. We've also contributed to reducing the inter-community violence through conflict-sensitive technical interventions that address disputes over access to natural resources and enhance local capacities for peace and negotiation. In Somalia, for example, a multi-year joint program with the World Food Programme and other partners enabled us to reduce the incidence of violence between pastoralists as well as sedentary farmers, and including crop farmers and others. In Sudan, FAO continues to facilitate dialogue between these types of communities and local authorities to prevent seasonal outbreaks of violence over access to water and grazing land. So the cohesion between people that draw their livelihoods from different aspects is a critical one, and the convergence of conflict that might be national as well as the impact of weather-based shocks may result in significant local conflicts for grazing as well as water. We've contributed to reduce women and girls' exposure to an impact of sexual and gender-based violence through improving their livelihood skills and conditions, facilitating their referrals to specialized services, and empowering them to claim their rights. In northern Syria, the DRC, and many other contexts, we use Dimitra Club model of community engagement to specifically help uphold the rights of women in rural areas, working in partnership with the UNFPA and protection specialist NGOs. When we give urgency to communities affected by a disaster, we create hope. And in most of these instances, hope is the item that can make a difference on whether people can survive and bear responsibility for each other's protection, or they do not actually do that. We've reduced the incidence of the worst forms of child labor in Burkina Faso through risk education, livelihood support, and school meal programs. We've also supported development of national policies and legislation that guarantee equitable land rights, acknowledging that legislation alone without actual enforcement or practice may not be sufficient. But we are encouraged to see processes, for instance, in Zimbabwe, where we co-led a national process involving a wide consultation with communities, civil society organizations, and other actors to secure improvements to the national land policy on more equitable land rights for women and girls. When we hear reports of how these have made a difference in communal areas where the pressure for land is also growing, we believe that we have the solutions. What we need is to scale out these solutions. And our program in Ukraine illustrates the full scope of this approach. FAO overlaid our analysis of the rise under the land tenure system with the analysis of agricultural areas most impacted by military operations to identify farming households most exposed to risks related to any of the impact of shelling that has occurred there, but also the forced displacement that ensued. Presenting this analysis to the government, we influenced their approach to prioritization and the clearance of and mines and other explosive materials to make way for the recovery of agriculture. And this is not small work. It requires different agencies with the speciality in the actual the mining, but the role of FAO and other agencies is more to identify the areas where the impact is greatest, and also to mobilize communities and link the different farmers, particularly with the private sector actors that can support the recovery of agriculture. These are regular and repeated examples of how FAO uses its agricultural livelihoods interventions to proactively reduce the protection risks that are driving food insecurity in the communities we work with. But we can certainly do more. It would highlighted how through the humanitarian reset, we are all challenged to do more with less and less. And at the center of that is to find solutions that are cost effective. And agriculture is a part of that solution. We need to expand and scale up these good practices of integrating protection. We also need to be more consistent in mainstreaming protection in every activity and intervention that we undertake. And to do that, we need a deeper operational partnership with protection actors. Victoria highlighted that at the food security cluster partners meeting that is just concluded a few minutes ago, there was a session on protection where Victoria and others were resource people. And this is how seriously we believe the integration of these issues become important to actually go beyond just talking about these things to concrete action that will make a difference in the lives of populations affected by disaster. I hope that a number of colleagues from the food security cluster are actually online, and they may be able to share some of the experiences that they have had. The decades-long partnerships we as FAO and food security actors have with the UNHCR or HCHR, NGO and other protection actors has been critical to the achievements I listed above. We need to expand and strengthen those partnerships, making sure we are working as a collective. And often it is easier to compete, yet what is critical now is to collaborate and work from our comparative competencies to ensure that the people that look at the service that we provide, not from an agency perspective, but from a solution perspective, can be served efficiently. We need more support from resource partners to enable this work. And we lament the current trend where funding is going down, and within sometimes what might be considered as prudent hyper prioritization, we see the neglect of critical aspects, including protection as well as livelihood interventions, which are critical to ensure that people that are already affected by a disaster do not then make risky decisions or get into risky behaviors to cope. I know that we have a few other colleagues that will highlight the experiences that they have had, and Action Mopt will be making a presentation to indicate also how some of the work that they are currently doing can contribute to the protection of communities affected by a disaster. I'll stop here for now. Over to you, Victoria.
Thanks so much, Maxwell. We're running a little bit over time, so I'm going to go straight to our colleague Medun Batali from Action Mopti. Medun, if I could ask you to try and keep to time if possible, so we have enough time for everyone on the panel. Sorry to squeeze you, but over to you. Thanks. Thanks, Maxwell.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Je suis Medoune Bachili de l'ONG Action Mopti Mali, ONG partenaire à Oxfam au Mali. Donc, je remercie Messieurs Edouard et Maxwell d'avoir mis notre intervention et notre approche intégrée dans le contexte. Alors, au Mali, l'équipe FSL et protection travaillent ensemble pour réduire les risques liés à la protection qui génèrent les besoins. Euh, Comme vous le savez tous, depuis 2012, le Mali traverse une crise multidimensionnelle politico-sécuritaire qui a profondément dégradé la situation humanitaire et de protection civile, des civils. Cette crise se manifeste par une exposition accrue aux violences, des déplacements massifs des populations, la perte des biens, des logements et des moyens de subsistance, ainsi une augmentation des violations basées sur le genre. Donc, à ceci, nous ajoutons aussi la crise climatique. Ces facteurs ont également un impact négatif sur l'accès à l'alimentation des ménages. Les risques de protection et l'insécurité alimentaire, comme l'a évoqué Edouard, sont étroitement liés. L'une exacerbe l'autre. C'est dans ce cadre que Action Monté, en partenariat avec Oxfam, intervient à travers le projet DGD humanitaire, articulé autour de trois volets principaux. Protection. euh, Ici, nous renforçons le leadership communautaire en matière de protection communautaire. Donc, le projet met en place des comités de protection qui sont appuyés techniquement et financièrement pour conduire des activités de prévention des risques de protection au niveau local. Donc, deuxième volet, sécurité alimentaire. Donc, nous travaillons sur la disponibilité, l'accès et l'utilisation. Et il s'agit ici d'améliorer la production agricole, l'accès à la nourriture et aux ressources à travers les caches et la distribution, et aussi les sensibilisations sur les bonnes pratiques hygiène et nutritionnelle et la démonstration culinaire. Donc, des plaidoyers sont aussi faits à travers la mise en place des réseaux de plaidoyers communautaires afin d'influencer les autorités pour un meilleur accès aux services sociaux de base. Donc, parlons de l'intégration, cas d'intégration. Donc, il s'agit ici de mettre en œuvre des programmes argent contre nourriture avec un pourcentage laissé au personnel de protection pour qu'il renvoie les cas aux équipes de sécurité alimentaire avec la flexibilité et l'objectif d'atténuer les risques de protection. Deux, il y a les bureaux d'orientation sur les sites de distribution qui sont composés en majeure partie des membres de CPC qui orientent lors de distribution et afin d'identifier et répondre aux problèmes de protection. Ils peuvent fournir des références immédiates à des services tels que la protection de l'enfance, le soutien à la violence liée au sexe de l'assistant ou l'assistant juridique. Excusez. Donc, il y a aussi les systèmes d'alerte précoce qui sont mis en place, qui suivent les indicateurs de sécurité alimentaire et de protection. Il s'agit de cartographier les schémas de pénurie alimentaire ainsi que les risques liés tels que les risques tels que les déplacements forcés, le recrutement par les groupes armés, etc., afin de permettre des réponses rapides et coordonnées qui répondent aux deux besoins. Nous procédons aussi à la recherche des plaidoyers conjoints sur la sécurité alimentaire, les conflits et les risques de protection. La réalisation d'études pour comprendre le lien entre l'insécurité alimentaire et les risques de protection, tels que l'exposition à l'exploitation, au travail des enfants, ou au déplacement forcé. Cette recherche aide à identifier les personnes les plus vulnérables et la manière dont les différents individus sont exposés au risque lorsque des ressources alimentaires sont rares. Et guider les approches de programmes intégrés, de programmation intégrée et être utilisé à des fins de plaidoyer. D'accord, donc juste à titre d'illustration, dans un de nos villages d'intervention, il a été signalé que les femmes qui apportent les repas lors de la saison pluvieuse aux hommes au champ sont souvent victimes d'attaques de violence ou d'agressions en cours de route. Donc, les hommes sont organisés. Désormais, les femmes n'amènent plus les repas, mais c'est les hommes maintenant qui viennent et chercher les repas à la maison une fois prêts. Donc ça, c'est juste un exemple à ce niveau. Et par rapport à l'assistance, et cette approche favorise l'insertion des survivantes de VBG, l'insertion socio-économique à travers des activités génératrices de revenus, hein, qui réduit la dépendance, les pratiques néfastes telles que le sexe de survie et améliore le bien-être des enfants grâce à la consommation ou la vente des laits, parce que nous procédons aussi à la distribution de petits ruminants. Pendant la distribution, les CPSO aussi font des sensibilisations, des séances de sensibilisation sur les risques de protection. Donc, il y a aussi l'approche 3x6 qui permet de mettre en groupe, sinon en coopérative, les bénéficiaires de Cash for Work pour les permettre de mettre en place des activités génératrices de revenus durables, ainsi renforçant la cohésion sociale et l'autonomisation économique. Donc, voilà pourquoi l'approche intégrée. Nous le faisons juste pour améliorer le bien-être général, de préserver la dignité des populations touchées par les crises. Merci.
I think we may have lost the connection with Medoun. We're also running a little bit over time. So I think, with apologies to Medoun and his colleagues in Oxfam, I think at this point, perhaps we'll just move to the next speaker, if that's all right. Hopefully Medoun can join us in a little while and come back, perhaps, if there are any questions or insights. But maybe just to say thanks, Medoun, and I know some of his colleagues are listening in as well. That was a really great example of the wide-ranging nature of ways in which food security programs can support and reduce protection risks, with a particular emphasis highlighting to us all how important meaningful engagement with communities is to understanding those risks and how we can use our different sectoral programs to try to mitigate them while empowering those communities as well. So I'm going to move swiftly over to our colleague Hind Al-Tayeb, who is joining us from the Khartoum emergency rooms program in Sudan, which I think a number of you might be familiar with. Hind, if I could hand over to you, that would be great. Sorry, we're changing the order of speakers around a little bit because we are waiting for Ross Smith from WFP to still join us. He's running quite late. I'm hoping he'll be with us in a few minutes, but if we could hear from you first, Hind, that would be great. So over to you. If we could keep to time, which I think is 7 minutes, that would be great. I know it's a lot to pack in. Thanks, Hind.
السلام عليكم ومرحب بجميع الضيوف والمتحدثين. شكرا جزيلا لإتاحة الفرصة. يشرفني أن أكون هنا اليوم لأشارك تجربتنا من السودان ومن غرف الطوارئ بولاية الخرطوم المكتب النسوي تحديدا. لقد أدركنا منذ بداية اشتعال الحرب أن المساعدات الغذائية وحدها لا تكون فعالة إذا لم تكن النساء والفتيات في أمان. فالجوع والعنف غالبا ما يترافقان بالنسبة للنساء. فعندما يخرجن بحثاً عن الطعام أو الحطب أو الماء يواجهن مخاطر التحرش أو الاعتداء أو الاستغلال. لذلك سعينا إلى ربط الجانبين معاً لضمان أن تقدم المساعدات الغذائية بطريقة تحمي الكرامة وتوفر الأمان. أثناء تنفيذ المبادرات للتغذية وتوزيع الطعام، لاحظنا أن النساء يواجهن مخاطر أثناء الحصول على الغذاء، مثل التنقل في مناطق غير آمنة أو التعرض للعنف أو الإهمال في أولوية التوزيع. النساء كن الأكثر مسؤولية عن إطعام الأسر، في نفس الوقت الأقل وصولاً للموارد. كما أن النساء الحوامل والمرضعات يواجهن أوضاعاً أكثر هشاشة، إذ يصعب عليهن التنقل لمسافات طويلة للوصول للمطابخ الجماعية بسبب ظروفهن الصحية، وغالباً ما لا تتوفر لهن كفاية غذائية مناسبة قبل الولادة أو بعدها، مما يؤثر على صحتهن وصحة أطفالهن. إضافة إلى ذلك النزوح المتكرر نظراً لتوسع رقعة النزاع باستمرار، وقد أدى ذلك لانتشار السلاح دون رقابة وتعدد الميليشيات، والذي بدوره أدى إلى زيادة الخطر على النساء أثناء تنقلهن اليومي. لذلك رأينا أن معالجة الأمن الغذائي دون حماية النساء يعني استمرار الخطر، فربطنا بين الاثنين لضمان سلامتهن وقدرتهن على تلبية احتياجات أسرهن بكرامة وأمان، حيث أدركنا أن الأمن الغذائي دون حماية يظل ناقصاً، لأن الجوع والعنف غالباً ما يتعايشان بالنسبة للنساء والفتيات. حاولنا القيام بعدد من الخطوات، نجح بعضها جزئياً وما زال بعضها يحتاج إلى دعم أكبر، ومن بين ذلك اختيار نقاط توزيع آمنة وسهلة الوصول بالتشاور مع المتطوعات والمتطوعين والنساء المحليات، إشراك النساء في اتخاذ القرار والتنسيق خصوصاً في تحديد الفئات الأكثر هشاشة، تدريب الفرق والمتطوعين على مبادئ الحماية من العنف القائم على النوع الاجتماعي والتعامل الآمن مع الناجيات، إنشاء آليات سرية للتبليغ والرصد عن أي حوادث أو انتهاكات، تنظيم جلسات توعية حول الوقاية من الاستغلال والعنف وحقوق النساء في تلقي المساعدات بأمان، الاستفادة من بعض المشاريع المتاحة والعمل على إنشاء مساحات آمنة للنساء تتوفر فيها وجبة واحدة على الأقل يومياً، لتكون نقاط التقاء آمنة وخدمة إنسانية مستدامة. دعم المطابخ المجتمعية النسائية، حيث يشكل ذلك أداة فعالة لتوفير الغذاء في بيئة أكثر أماناً للنساء والأطفال، والحد من المخاطر التي تواجهها النساء أثناء البحث عن الطعام. فعلى سبيل المثال تدير غرفة طوارئ شرق النيل مطبخين تقودهما نساء ضمن 5 مطابخ نشطة في منطقة الفيحاء، في تجربة تبرز دور القيادة النسائية في العمل الإنساني والاستجابة المجتمعية. تدريب الأسر ومن ضمنها التي تقودها النساء على الزراعة المنزلية كمصدر إضافي للغذاء والدخل. وهناك تجربة ناجحة قامت بها غرفة طوارئ بحري في منطقة القرى المتحدة، ساعدت في تعزيز الاعتماد الذاتي وتقليل المخاطر. دعم المشاريع الإنتاجية الصغيرة التي تقودها النساء مما يسهم في تمكين عدد منهن اقتصادياً. كما في تجربة المكتب النسوي بغرفة طوارئ كرري، حيث استثمرت موارد محدودة في مشروعات مدرة للدخل مكنت النساء من إعالة أسرهن بأمان واستقلالية، وأظهرت كيف يمكن للدعم المباشر أن يعزز الأمن الغذائي ويحمي النساء من المخاطر. ورغم هذا التقدم لا تزال هناك حاجة كبيرة إلى مزيد من التدريب لكل من العاملين الإنسانيين والمجتمعات حول مبادئ الحماية وآليات التبليغ والرصد، إضافة إلى ضرورة توسيع جلسات التوعية ودعمها في المناطق المتأثرة بالنزاع. وفي الوقت نفسه فإن ضعف التمويل المخصص للحماية يجعل هذا العمل بالغ الصعوبة. غالباً ما تكون مشاريع الحماية ممولة تمويلاً ناقصاً أو غير مدرجة أصلاً، كما أن جمود المنح الموجهة للغذاء أو القطاعات الأخرى يمنعنا من استخدام جزء بسيط من الموارد لدعم أنشطة الحماية، وهذا يفرض عبئاً أكبر على غرف الطوارئ خصوصاً المكاتب النسوية التي تضطر للعمل بموارد محدودة للغاية، ويطلب منا دمج الحماية لكن بدون تمويل مرن، فيصبح من شبه المستحيل الاستمرار. من خلال هذا النهج الموحد حققنا نتائج بسيطة تحتاج للدعم حتى نصل للأهداف المرجوة، حيث حدث انخفاض في عدد الحوادث والشكاوى المرتبطة بالعنف أثناء التوزيع، ظهر تحسن في مشاركة النساء في إدارة الأنشطة الإنسانية خصوصاً في مجال الأمن الغذائي، زاد وعي المجتمعات المحلية بأهمية الحماية، تحسنت الثقة بين المجتمع وغرف الطوارئ مما سهل الوصول للمناطق الأكثر تضرراً والفئات الأكثر هشاشة، والأهم تحسن الأمن الغذائي للأسر التي تقودها النساء. لكن رغم هذه الإنجازات فإن فجوة التمويل المخصصة للحماية ما زالت تهدد استمرار التقدم، فمن دون تمويل مباشر ومرن لا تستطيع غرف الطوارئ مواصلة جهودها في مجال الحماية، مما يشكل عبئاً أكبر عليها. لذا فإن الغرف تحتاج إلى دعم أكبر في مجالي الحماية والأمن الغذائي والمناصرة كذلك، ودعم إنشاء المزيد من المساحات الآمنة والصديقة للنساء والأطفال، إلى جانب توفير تمويل مخصص للمشاريع الإنتاجية الصغيرة التي تتيح للنساء مصدر دخل مستدام، مما يساعدهن على توفير الغذاء لأنفسهن ولأسرهن دون مشقة الذهاب للمطابخ الجماعية. أي دعم موجه لهذه الجوانب هو مهم ومؤثر في تعزيز صمود النساء والمجتمعات. إن النساء مستعدات للعمل، والمجتمعات تقود التغيير على الأرض، لكنها تحتاج إلى الموارد لتستمر. تظهر تجربتنا في غرف الطوارئ بالخرطوم أنه عندما تكون النساء في أمان تشبع الأسر وتتعافى المجتمعات بشكل أسرع. فالحماية والأمن الغذائي يجب أن يسيرا معا، وكلاهما يحتاج إلى استثمار حقيقي ومرن يضع النساء في مركز الاستجابة. شكرا لكم مرة أخرى على إتاحة هذه الفرصة، ونأمل أن تسهم التجارب التي شاركناها اليوم في دفع الجهود المشتركة نحو حماية النساء وضمان أمنهن الغذائي، وأن تجد الاستجابة العاجلة التي توازي حجم التحديات والتدخل المطلوب. تحياتي للجميع.
Shukran, Hind. Thank you for that. Some really great insights from both you and Madoon from Action Mukti about how you as local actors are already working in this way. And that's great learning for the rest of us to really take on board. Speaking of funding and resourcing, as you did there, Hind, I'm going to pass now to Anne-Sophie Lenkham, who is joining us from ECHO. Anne-Sophie, I know you have a lot of thoughts and insights into this topic, but in particular, I wondered if you might be able to give us some thoughts about what you and maybe even some of the other donors expect from us in terms of how we can operationalize the centrality of protection, and in particular, what you want to see us do more of.
Thank you very much, Vicky. And thank you for inviting me here today to speak on this panel. So from DG ECHO, we've been promoting and supporting integrated programming between food security and protection for, I think, close to 10 years now. Our protection policy that was published in 2016 even includes specific guidance on this. And also between protection and other sectors such as education, health, nutrition. So far, the uptake has been relatively limited, but I'm happy to hear all the examples that we're being presented with. And to be frank, more often than not, they've been linked to contexts where, as we say, protection is not allowed, meaning that the only way of doing protection is embedding it into other sectors. We therefore welcome this initiative towards further operationalizing integrated approaches between the two sectors, as well as the ongoing Swedish-funded initiative, co-led by ACF and IRC, to also operationalize resources to support sector-specific outcomes, putting protection risk identification and mitigation at the center of any humanitarian response. Working towards collective action to effectively reduce affected people's exposure to risks and violence and abuse, thereby really operationalizing the centrality of protection, is now more relevant than ever. In light of the crisis we see, in light of globally shrinking resources, as everybody refers to these days, and in light of the whole reset. And this is also one of the key messages from the Global Protection Donor Group, co-led by Sweden and Switzerland. First, I think we can no longer pretend, as also highlighted by almost all the other panelists, that humanitarian needs are not driven by protection risks. And therefore, we must stop working in silos. Because when we do work in silos, we're not efficient, and we cannot afford to not be efficient anymore. Second, very often what happens is that the protection sector ends up having to compensate for other sectors' failure to incorporate protection risk into their targeting by covering basic needs, and therefore actually diverting resources away from the protection sector or from addressing protection risks. And this, from ECHO's side, we will no longer accept. Let me give you an example. During a joint food security and protection mission in Congo, it was some years ago, I admit that, my food security colleague was approached by a woman who had not been targeted for the food security component. My colleague asked the woman if she knew why she hadn't been targeted. And apparently she had been told that their food consumption score was too high, as she managed to provide 2 meals a day for her family. My colleague then asked, how did she do that? And she said, well, I crossed the road from the IDP camp to where the soldiers are stationed, and I prostitute myself. This shows what happens when other sectors do not take into account protection risks in their targeting criteria. So you asked, what do we expect of partners? Well, we do expect that all humanitarian interventions are designed based on an analysis of the risks, as these are understood from the perspective of the people that we aim to assist, and how these translate into risks and needs. We expect that based on this risk analysis, partners in all sectors adopt protection-sensitive targeting to avoid that those who may not qualify for assistance based on standard demographic, socioeconomic vulnerability criteria fall through the cracks. This is the true meaning of leaving no one behind. As a minimum, we also expect that all partners use the DG ECHO protection mainstreaming key outcome indicator or an equivalent.
Sound, sorry, we can't hear.
Sorry, can you hear me? Yeah.
Hmm?
Or an equivalently strong protection mainstreaming indicator in all actions providing direct assistance and services to facilitate the operationalization of protection mainstreaming. But while protection mainstreaming is important, it is not sufficient in and by itself to address the risks that create the needs. And therefore, integrated programming and collective actions are needed. At the crux of acting collectively is whether referral systems work effectively between humanitarian actors on the ground. We no longer want to see this is my beneficiary only. We have seen it. And we will strongly recommend using an indicator to measure effective referrals, be it within or between organizations. We know that one of the major challenges in terms of referring from protection actors to food security actors is that in food security programs, beneficiaries are usually selected at the onset of the action, whilst protection cases are identified in a more incremental manner. But there are ways of overcoming this by reserving a small percentage of the overall beneficiaries for cases that gets referred later. Referrals are inevitably linked with data sharing, and we know that this often raises concerns amongst protection actors. We understand these concerns, but we do expect partners to overcome these through technical solutions, data sharing agreements, respecting data protection standards, as the most important is that the persons in need gets referred to those that are best placed to assist them. I can imagine that some of you are also wondering what DG ECHO can do for you to enable more integrated programming. And I am aware that many of you will not regard DG ECHO as the most flexible donor in the world. And while this is true in the sense that we do not provide earmarked funding, we do offer a very high degree of flexibility within individual contracts. So please do use this flexibility to facilitate integrated approaches. That being said, I will openly recognize that what is not very flexible is the ECHO single form, which is very sector siloed and does not exactly facilitate integrated programming. But unfortunately, this is way above my pay grade to change. We have tried. Taking it to a higher level, and as part of the Global Protection Donor Group, we have also committed to contribute to the integration of centrality of protection and relevant protection activities in the various work streams through advocacy, technical input, and support to establish coordination structures. We advocate with humanitarian leaders and partners to safeguard capacities to effectively implement the centrality of protection by prioritizing, identifying, and responding to the most acute protection risks. We ensure that our commitment to centrality protection continues to stand out clearly in our key messages to all partners, to the humanitarian leadership, including the ERC, and to other donors in different coordination forums. And we commit to continue using our political, financial, and soft power to support humanitarian leadership in efforts to protect affected populations from violence, coercion, and deliberate deprivation. Thank you again to the GPC, to WFP, to FAO for the opportunity to intervene today. And let me use this opportunity to also ask you all what we can do as donor to further facilitate strengthening of integrated food security and protection programming. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne-Sophie. Thanks for that very strong, impassioned call to action to all of us. I think we've all heard that. It's great that you are wanting to hold us to account. I think we all acknowledge that's essential, but also willing to see where you can support us better. So I think we now have Ross Smith, who's been able to join us online. Ross, are you with us?
I am with you, Victoria.
Hi,
can
Ross.
you see me or hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, and I think we can see you. Thanks so much for joining. And I know you haven't heard the earlier parts of the discussion, so apologies if this is putting you a little bit on the spot. But I wondered if you had been listening to Anne-Sophie's, just perhaps her last question, which was how can donors better support us in centralizing protection in our food security responses? I wondered if you might have some thoughts in response to that question.
No, thanks very much, Victoria. And I see you have a good turnout online here, which is fantastic. And apologies that I missed the first part of this. I've been running between a meeting that ran late. And thanks, Maxwell. I think Maxwell was online picking up some of those introductory points. I think from what I understand from Andrea and the team, we've had some good discussion on the links between protection and food security and livelihoods work. And I think there was also the panel this morning in the Global Partners meeting for the food security cluster as well. I opened that a couple of days ago, and we did mention at that point a few of these issues too. I'll come to the question in a second, but just let me say from the WFP perspective, protection is not an add-on to our food security work. We are increasingly now, as we look at how we do improve the quality of what we do with fewer resources. So we are obviously going to have a contraction of our coverage overall for our emergency assistance and other types of assistance, but we want to strengthen the quality of that which remains. And I think protection is a key aspect of that. It means that we're providing assistance in a safe and dignified manner, that we are, reaching people effectively and reaching them where they are. And I think there's a direct connection between the centrality of protection and the quality of our assistance and the impact we want to make in terms of food insecurity. So, it really is about reaching the right people, the right time, the right manner, and protection is a part of that. We've got some great examples in different places where, I think this has been done both in terms of the risk assessment work and risk analysis. WFP has this ICARA tool, this integrated context analysis tool, which does pick up protection amongst other risks and helps guide some of our subsequent programming that's there. When I was based in Syria most recently, we worked a lot on the whole referral mechanism amongst the partners so that we build in a referral mechanism into the targeting of our food assistance, so that we are, as part of our vulnerability targeting, that is built in. And so I think that requires the work and the collaboration with many of these local partners that are in the best position to understand needs on the ground and to do referrals. I think for me the partnership angle here is very, very important. We're not a protection mandated agency, but it's really, as one of the largest humanitarian agencies, it's really important for me that we take this very seriously. So we partner with protection mandated agencies, but more importantly, or as importantly, we're partnering with many of those local organizations around the world for which this is core business and for who are best placed to support the work and to support the centrality of protection. There's a number of other partnerships around, as I mentioned, referral pathways and supporting those services, protection-related services, but also on the data side of things, data sharing, data analysis, advocacy, policy engagement, and that's something I would really encourage people to reach out to WFP, various offices. We'd be interested in having those conversations as part of the effort we're making now to strengthen the quality of our assistance. And so, just to from me, you've got my commitment and our commitment to continue to work on this to strengthen our work. Question. So coming back to your question, how can donors better support? I think, as my ECHO colleague was mentioning, there are sometimes a number of restrictions and earmarking of funds, which can be a challenge. But within that, I think there are oftentimes missed opportunities at present where we can, for sometimes not large amounts of money, we can really strengthen the quality of the work that we do by building in some of these accountability to affected population related, protection related components. And so I think, an open ear from the donor side to support that, to be receptive of that when we build that to our different programs. And I'm talking about the food security sector, but this can come from other sectors as well. I think that one of my major concerns, I was listening a little bit to my colleague from Sudan talking about the community kitchens, emergency response rooms. I mean, there has been a reduction of USAID funding this year that I understand has seen an overall reduction of 80% of funds for some of these local NGOs, local organizations working in some of the most difficult places. So what I would say to other donor partners is there are some major gaps here that, for relatively small amounts of money can really strengthen the responsiveness, the agility, the flexibility of the humanitarian sector on the ground, including those protection actors that are often some of the first victims, if you will, of funding cuts that are there to small organizations. So that would be another angle I would suggest, is to focus on, broadly speaking, localization, but more specifically speaking, how do we support local protection organization, protection mandated or protection related organizations at the field level? So Victoria, I'll stop there. Happy to answer other questions, and I'll stay with you for another 10 or 15 minutes.
That's great. Thanks so much, Ross. Really appreciate it. And thanks. It's great to hear and have reiterated WFP's commitment, both as an agency and as the other co-lead for food security on this particular topic. So with that, I can open the floor to any questions that our members of the audience might have for any of our panelists, or just in general. I do have a short list of organizations that already contacted us and asked if they could take the floor for a few minutes. But before I do that, I just wonder if there are any immediate questions or thoughts in response, particularly for Ross, who'll be leaving us in just a few moments. But any questions from the floor, from the audience? I can see James Kabagambe. Would you like to take the floor? What's your question, please?
Oui, bonjour, merci beaucoup pour la parole accordée. Je suis James, je salue la qualité des débats. J'ai une question concernant le contexte de la RDC a priori pour faire le lien entre la protection et les activités génératrices de revenus, par exemple. C'est pour juste s'assurer comment les principes de protection, notamment la dignité, la non-discrimination, la participation, peuvent être pleinement intégrés à toutes les étapes d'une mise en œuvre des AGR, par exemple. Je prends un exemple d'activité de moyens d'existence. Je voudrais profiter de cette occasion pour soumettre la question à une réflexion collective et puis aussi bénéficier des conseils. Merci beaucoup.
Thanks, James. Is that a question for a particular panelist, or would you like to direct it to anyone in particular?
Non, c'est pour l'Assemblée et puis pour le forum. J'ai besoin vraiment d'avoir des idées, des orientations de la part d'une réflexion collective, quoi, à qui veut. Merci.
Thanks. Maybe, James, while the audience and panelists ponder a little bit on your question, which is quite broad, while we're doing that, I wonder if I could go to ACF, our colleagues at Action Contre les Femmes, who wanted to take the floor to give a couple of minutes reflections on one of the issues that's come up repeatedly amongst all of the different speakers we've had today. And that's how do we embed an understanding of protection risks in our analysis of food security needs, or how do we make those connections? Angeliki, is it you from ACF who'd like to take the floor? If I could ask you to keep it really short, Angeliki, I know there's a lot you have to say about this and all the great work you've been doing, but if you could keep it short, that would be great. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Vicky, and thanks everyone for giving us the opportunity to present. I think, what we are trying to do with ACF and the IRC's project funded by SIDA with great support from other donors such as ECHO is to really operationalize the centrality of protection and make sure that food security actors and food security organizations, they do have the tools they need in order to be able to flexibly integrate protection risk analysis in their responses. We have great examples from the field, including testing resources in Ethiopia, but also in Cameroon more recently. And we really see how bringing together protection actors and food security staff and really bridging expertise from different sectors can actually identify protection risks and build risk-informed programming in order to reduce threats, violence, and contribute jointly to protection outcomes. So what we would really like to highlight is that opportunities are there. Very often, field staff, field colleagues have the answers, and it's really up to us to create the space and enable these voices by providing simple, flexible guidance. We do know that resources are shrinking, so we don't ask people to do more, but we would like to do better. And again, protection is not an additional layer of work, is a vehicle to really promote risk reduction, respect for human rights and dignity. That's all from our side, really supportive of the presentations and really happy to have additional conversations with anyone who would be interested.
Thanks, Angeliki. For those joining us in the audience, also please feel free to put any links to tools or projects that you're working on that you'd like to share with other members. I wondered if anybody would like to respond to James's question, which I guess was really around how do we ensure and embed a sense of dignity as well as rights in the way that we program as food security actors. I don't know if any of our panelists would like to respond to that. Ross, please go ahead. Or Maxwell, do you want to go first, Maxwell?
Go ahead, Maxwell.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that particular question for the context of DRC. I was in DRC 3 weeks ago, and I had an opportunity to go to Kasai, where we met a number of community groups in different value chains. What stuck with me was the way the community members were highlighting how the facilitation of Dimitral groups, where different community members come together and do an assessment of the challenges that they are facing, and they try to look at the different solutions that they have applied before and see the things that they can do for themselves, whether it's from a food security perspective or from a protection perspective or from a communication and transportation perspective. And they also identify the gaps for which they might require external facilitation or resourcing. And based on a local conversation on what the issues are and what the local solutions are, and where, say, external, including national government actors could come in, we see that there is a co-creation of the solutions. For instance, from a transportation of produce, after the support on agricultural production, the one issue that that came up related to how to transport this produce safely without facing risks is to look at working with local private sector. These are individuals or families that might have a tricycle that can be accessed on a higher basis, and that reduces the number of trips that, say, women and girls have to go to to the field to bring produce home. But just to underline the fact that the solutions do not need necessarily to come from outside. They have to be facilitated locally, and they will not only be sustainable, but will be at an affordable level. Thank you.
Thanks, Maxwell. Super important point to highlight. Ross, did you want to come in on this as well?
Just to quickly, I'll just re-emphasize what Maxwell was saying. I really do think it isn't, solutions are really primarily not coming from the outside. I think it's about the design phase, really at the early stages of either design of your intervention or your planning or whatever the process is. Even if something has been ongoing, a project has been ongoing, there's lots of opportunity to retrofit that project by engaging at the local level, by talking to people that are affected, by talking to local organizations, and really building on their expertise. And for me, in the food security sector, at least in the food assistance, sort of the life-saving side of this, Maxwell had talked about some of the livelihood sides as well. There's a coming together in the area of targeting and prioritization and vulnerability. And this is where I think locally based protection expertise is really, really important for us as a food sector to really understand where those vulnerabilities persist and how we can best support them, and whether that's through local institutions or it's just through targeting at the community level. And I think for me, that's where you see that linkage and that integration. Thanks, Victoria.
Thanks, Ross. And thanks particularly for highlighting, again, the importance of meaningful engagement with communities. I don't think any sector or any organization does it enough. And it's really fundamental as a principle in terms of understanding protection risks and understanding how we can help communities respond to those risks. So thank you for flagging that. I can see a couple of questions in the chat, so I'm going to go to one of those first. It's from Katie Grant. Katie, I don't know whether you want to come in and share that, or do you want me to just read it out from the chat?
Sure. If you can hear me, happy to read it out. But I'm
Please go ahead.
Inspired, thanks, by some of the local civil society organizations that we have on the call today. So I'd really love to direct this question to them and understand how you really engaged with the protection risk analysis that informed your programming and your interventions. And really, if this was jointly with participation with other agencies, with the protection cluster, with the food security cluster, if you were leading it within your organization and your partners, and if you have recommendations or insights related to how to better support that collaboration in joint analysis, but in a way that's quite accessible, relevant, inclusive for local and national partners that have so much expertise to bring to this space. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. Hind, could I maybe see if you would like to respond to that question about how you undertake analysis of the risks? Do you do that on your own? Do you do that with other partners? Be great to hear about that. Thanks.
شكرا مرة ثانية للفرصة. شكرا على السؤال. حقيقي التقييم بتاع المخاطر بيكون على مراحل. بنقيم قبل بداية المشروع نفسه إنه هل المنطقة دي حالياً آمنة لإنشاء المطبخ المعين أو المساحة المعينة أو أي حاجة أو مشروع عايزين ننفذه في منطقة معينة. بيكون في تقييم خلال العمل نفسه. بنسمع آراء المطوعين وآراء المستفيدين من المشروع ده إنه هل الحاجة دي بالنسبة لهم كانت كافية، وهل لاحظوا أي أخطاء في التنفيذ أو قلة حماية لهم من إنهم هم ينخرطوا في المشروع ده كمطوعين أو يستفيدوا منه كمستفيدين. وبالتأكيد في نهاية أي مشروع إحنا بنشتغل بالشراكة مع الجهات اللي ممكن تكون قدمت لنا الدعم إنه نعمل تقارير نهائية لأي مشروع بيكون فيها تقييم للحاجة اللي حصلت دي وتقييم للمخاطر اللي ممكن تكون واجهت الناس وكيف ممكن نعالجها في المرات الجاية يعني. فأعتقد دي المراحل اللي احنا بنشتغل بها بصورة مستمرة منذ يعني نشأة غرف الطوارئ ولحد الآن. لو في أي سؤال متخصص في حاجة معينة ممكن كمان أجاوب عليه. شكرا.
Thanks, Hind. I think you responded a little bit to Katie's question. Medoun, if you're still online, would you like to also tell us a bit more about how you undertake the analysis of risks that you then try to mitigate in your program?
محاولة تقليل المخاطر.
Bonjour, merci pour la question. Peut-être que je pourrais me faire compléter par Lalaïcha et Bilid. Donc, par rapport à la limitation des risques, parce qu'avant la mise en œuvre de nos activités ou au démarrage de chaque activité, nous avons notre matrice des risques que nous mettons à jour. Donc, s'il s'agit de cette approche-là, oui, il s'agit de la programmation sûre par rapport à la mise en œuvre des activités et même avant la mise en œuvre le lancement des projets, il y a notre matrice de risques, de gestion des risques globale qui est mise à jour en fonction de la thématique. Donc, voilà, il y a aussi des études qui sont conduites telles que les diagnostics pour identifier les risques liés à la protection de façon générale. Ce qui, très généralement, c'est le rapport de ce diagnostic qui oriente les activités de protection ou qui oriente aussi qui permet d'identifier les besoins en matière d'assistance alimentaire ou de sécurité alimentaire. Voilà. Les et Laïcha là sont là pour compléter si besoin.
Thanks, Madun. Appreciate that. We're running close to time, so I know that there are a couple of other questions and a couple of other speakers. For those who wish to, please respond to the questions in the chat if you feel like doing that. I'm going to give 1 minute to Abdul Majid, who is one of the 2 global coordinators for the food security cluster. Abdul Majid, if you're still with us, could I just give you 1 minute to just make a couple of quick remarks? I know that you were keen to introduce yourself to this protection audience in particular, but also to give a few words from that sort of operational level work of the cluster.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Abdul Majid, Global Food Security Cluster Co-Coordinator. Yes, I have very short time, so protection protection risks or working on the protection is not new for us in Global Food Security Cluster. We were even working more on the protection in the previous years when we used to have very strong food security and livelihood response and transferring assets and market supports, and those times the programs were enriched both at the supply side and at the demand side. But I am really happy to see that we are now working again with the protection cluster with the renewed support and energy. We are going to global level partners, we are going to the country level partners. We have some good examples in Syria. We have some good examples in Sudan, and we are very much willing to, support our local partners who will be taking lead in providing food security and livelihood response in future, to understand these concepts, to integrate these concepts into the programming. So please feel free to reach out to the Global Food Security Cluster at the global level and also at the country level whenever you need any support on types of the food security responses or how we integrate protection into those responses. So we are very much available at global and country levels, very easily accessible. You just Google Global Food Security Cluster, you will land on our front page, and then you can scroll down to the countries and reach our teams at least in 33 contexts where we are operational now. I will stop here looking at the time that you have, Vicky. Over.
Thanks, Abdul Majid. Sylvia, I know that you wanted to introduce your work in developing a toolkit on child protection and food security responses. I wonder if you could put some information in the chat, because we have to finish on time because the interpreters are moving on to the next event. So I'm really sorry not to be able to give you time on the floor, but please feel free to put your information and various links in the chat. And for the last 2.5 minutes, I'm going to hand over to Erin Weir. Erin is the Director of Protection at Interaction and one of the 3 co-champions of the centrality of protection in the IAC. Erin has very kindly volunteered at what is a very early time for her in Canada to wrap up and give some overarching thoughts and headlines from the discussion we've had today. So over to you, Erin.
Thank you, Vicky. And thank you to all of the speakers. This was a great panel. I mean, in this moment where needs are huge and funding is decreasing, applying the centrality of protection is a crucial way to multiply impact of scarce aid resources. I think everybody said that. I think this perhaps most critically applies to the targeting of food assistance, and addressing needs without addressing protection risks amounts to incomplete or even irresponsible programming at this stage. It takes a shift in thinking and in process, but our panelists have shown us that it can be done. Between them, they spoke about the ways they were able to reduce forced displacement, intercommunal violence, exposure to GBV, forced recruitment, and all of that by engaging closely with communities, affected communities, identifying the links between protection risk and access to food, and in targeting food and agricultural inputs accordingly. I think importantly, we've heard that mainstreaming or do no harm is necessary but insufficient. I note and appreciate the support of our colleague from ECHO, who's indicated that more comprehensive integration of risk reduction methods is necessary for partner programming. And finally, I mean, to conclude, I think I'll say that the positive example set by the food security sector, the support indicated by donors, the tools and resources available to support implementation of centrality of protection at this day and age, all means that there can no longer be any excuse for providing aid without reference to protection risk. We cannot proceed in that way. I think Hin said, when women are safe, families are well fed and more resilient. And that's exactly the point. Exposure to violence, coercion, and deliberate deprivation is inextricably bound up with access to basic necessities like food. And we now have the tools, and I think we're starting to create the will to address these both in tandem. And I think I'll leave it at that.
Thanks so much, Erin. All that leaves me to say is thanks so much to our esteemed panelists, to Edward, Maxwell, Medoun, Hind, and Sophie and Ross, and thanks to all of you for joining us in this event today. I hope you found it useful. It certainly was useful from our perspective. If you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to us, including via the Global Protection Cluster colleagues, if that would be helpful. Thanks again, everyone, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Vicky. Thanks all. Great session.
Thanks, colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank
you.
Shukran, thank you.
Merci.